My name is Jeffrey Sidoris, and this is Process Driven. One of the first photographers I reached out to when I started recording conversations and podcasting was John Keatley. I was introduced to his work by a friend, and what struck me straight away was how seamlessly John's commercial work fit with his conceptual photography. Though each body of work is distinct, John's eye for detail and his love of ambiguity runs through all of it. While we don't talk often, when we do, I find the conversations stick with me, and they often inform the way I think about my own work as well as the work of others. He's recently entered the world of fine art photography with a project called Uniform that centers around a personal exploration of identity and, as he puts it, a deep need to be seen. In addition to a series of limited edition prints, Uniform is available as a book, John's first, in fact, and that's where we begin this episode. Here's my conversation with John Keatley.
Please listen carefully.
You know what? It's been a while since I've looked at the scope of this project. I didn't realize that you had done so many of them, because I think when the last time I looked at it, you were in the process of kind of figuring out how deep down this rabbit hole you wanted to go. And man, what a great body of work.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think probably the first time we talked, it was just like, you could break it down into two parts, because I did two shoots, and the first one was like 16 images. Mm-hmm. And then recently I added a second kind of shoot to it, essentially, and more than doubled it. But there's a lot of differences. It's a lot more than just adding more images. I mean, there was the series really changed, I think.
How so?
From the first to second shoot. Well, I think the first shoot was, I had this idea, and then I had to create the world. And in addition to creating the world, you have to create all the little bits and pieces and structure of the whole thing. And mm-hmm. You've never done it before. And so I tend to overthink things. I do. I overthink things. And so I think the first shoot was very controlled and structured.
Right.
And I really liked the images, but as I got away from them, I realized they were all very rigid and just kind of quiet and straightforward and structured.
Was that not the original intent?
Well, I mean, it was to some extent, mm-hmm. But I think, as with anything, you create something and you step back and you see what it actually is, right, regardless of what your intent was, right? And right. So as I stood back from it, I realized that I had more to say. Some people had told me the series wasn't complete when I first did it. And, outside criticism is always tricky, because it's got to ultimately be what you want it to be, not what mm-hmm. someone else thinks it should be. But I wrestled with that, and I hated it also, because I felt like it was done. But I eventually got to a point where I realized that I couldn't let go of it. I kept trying to create new. I couldn't get rid of this idea of painting people, and I just had all these ideas, and I kept trying to work them into other things that didn't really make sense. And finally, I was like, man, what is going on? And I realized I had more to say, and a big part of that was that the original round was lacking emotion. It was this, deeply personal, emotional story that I was unfolding on my own, and it's an emotional story, and there was no emotion in the work. And so I wanted to go back and create with more freedom, which I think I was able to do the second time around, because you're not worrying so much about all these little things that you've already established. Right. You have the rules set in place, and so now you kind of just create and respond emotionally. And I just felt like when I went back, I had so much more freedom and excitement, and I wasn't as stressed, or thinking as much, about everything as I had the first time. And so I felt like the new images were just that. For me at least, they just felt like they had a lot more emotion and energy. And there was a lot of other things too. Like, as I looked at the series and kind of thought about it after the first shoot, I realized that I was being quite literal to the original Green Army toys, which were all male characters. Mm-hmm. And I was like, when have I ever cared at all about being literal. Like,
right.
That's not at all who I am, but why am I doing that here? And so I felt like, if I am going to tell a story about a human story, you can't do that with just male characters.
Had that occurred to you in the first series, or had it not? Were you only able to see that kind of looking back?
Yeah, I only saw that looking back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, you set up these rules for this world that you're trying to create, and this experience you're trying to create for others.
Right.
And, you make choices and you think that, whatever you think. And then, like I said, you step back and you're like, oh, that was the wrong decision.
Right.
So that, I think, thankfully, most of the things that I did, like, there was nothing in the structure that I regret. Thankfully,
Mm-hmm.
adding women is something that easily can be done. Had I composed them in a way where I regretted, that would be problematic. But thankfully, the framework was all there. So.
Right. Did your approach change in terms of how you communicated what you were after to your models, to your subject, from the first series to the second?
I mean, maybe in subtle ways. I mean, certainly in terms of the direction that I gave them was much more, emotional and more explorative.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a word, but explorative.
It is now, John.
It sounded right. But I think there was that, I suppose. And I think probably I was more free in how I communicated. Again, I just think I was probably pretty rigid and focused the first time around. But I wouldn't say that I probably changed too much in terms of how I communicated. I think the one thing that did change, though, is the first series was all just kind of street casting, just looking for people who really had an everyday off the street kind of feel.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically people who didn't have experience, modeling or acting. And
right.
Because I think I was going for something very rigid and straightforward. And I think that worked. But what I realized the second time around is if I do want more emotion, it can't just come from me realizing that. It's a collaboration. So I really did need to find people who could also bring that to the table. And so I did cast specifically actors and models and people who could, convey that emotion.
Sure.
The second time around. So that was a big change, obviously.
How did you, this is interesting. I didn't know that about, or maybe I'd forgotten if I did know it. How did you sell it that first time around because you had nothing to show at that point. So how do you tell people, I want to paint you to look like an army man, like a toy army man? Or what was the pitch for this project?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times, especially for something like that, you really lean on your past work because sometimes these ideas sound so strange and people are like, I don't want to be painted or, I don't know. I mean, you always get your own ideas and it makes perfect sense to you. But yeah, I think sometimes I don't even probably fully know or appreciate what it sounds like to someone else. I'm always surprised when someone turns me down or rejects me because I'm like, this is the greatest idea ever. But,
right. Why don't you see this?
Yeah. But I think for something like that, you rely a lot on past work. And so maybe it's you show, hey, I shot these celebrities or whatever. And it's lowest common denominator. It's not really what we're doing here, but if that's what it takes to get it across the line.
Right. If these people trust me, then maybe you can too, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think there's some of that. It's just getting them excited in general. If you can't get them excited about the idea, just get them excited in general. And the idea sounds less crazy. But I've already noticed I'm working on a new project and just simply having uniform complete and having a book and having something people can actually see. Uniform doesn't even translate to this new project, but I've had quite a bit of a better response so far getting people on board to this new one, just having that first one.
Because uniform's done. Wow.
In the bag, yeah. So I think it's just kind of building on what you've done.
Has it changed how you approach your photography? Because I know for a while there was, you were going in more of a director kind of perspective, getting not necessarily getting away from still images, because that's not the right way to say it, but you were toying with kind of a different direction for your career, and it seems like this project has sort of taken you in another direction still, but more toward that sort of fine art still image based in a larger body of work vein.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of pivot points throughout my career, and I still do direct, primarily commercial campaigns and stuff like that. and I really enjoy that. But I think probably what I've found from Uniform is that, like, my true love is still images.
Right.
And my new series is all still images, at least for now. I mean, I've learned to, even through our conversations in the past, I tend to make these like statements, and then months later I'm like, well, maybe that wasn't the
maybe
right
that wasn't a great idea. Yeah.
But yeah, I love I love the permanence of a still image. There's something about it that, especially with fine art, if it's on your wall, like you see it every day, and you can make all kinds of film is obviously a wonderful medium, but for me personally, I just find that the ideas that I'm coming up with, at least right now, are fitting much better as a series of still images. And I just love the ability to kind of communicate simply through that medium.
It sounds like there might be more of a freedom in the sort of fine art gallery world than there is on the commercial side for you at this point. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say, I guess you could say freedom. It's interesting because in the past, as I've picked up new things, like, going from editorial to advertising or whatever, I tend to leave the old thing behind. But with fine art, it's the first time where I'm not leaving the last thing behind, because I really enjoy working on commercial campaigns. I love the collaboration and the travel and the people that I get to meet. And a lot of times they're humor based, which is something that I really love.
Right.
And, maybe more kind of direct, over the head humor than I would do necessarily in my personal work, but it still resonates and is enjoyable and stuff like that. So I really love those commercial projects. And I think in some ways, I guess to answer your question, I mean, there's complete freedom in my fine art work, but it's also given me more freedom in my commercial work, because I used to try to force all of my ideas and all my creativity into my commercial work when that's all I had. And so
now you have kind of another outlet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, when a client shuts you down or an agency says that's not in line with our goal or whatever, if you have some idea, it's like, it's not life or death, and it's not personal. It's like, okay, well, for this campaign to be its best version of itself, people need to wear this green thing, even though I really wanted them to wear blue.
Right.
But that's fine. Like, we want the campaign to be as successful as possible. That's the whole point. That's why they're paying me. And if I feel the need to, work blue and somehow, I have this whole other project where I can do that as much as I want. So I think it's actually brought freedom on multiple levels in that sense. But certainly with fine art, for me, the goal is to be not strategic at all. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm not trying to create something that I think people will buy. It's just, what is something that I'm going to create that I feel will express whatever it is that I'm trying to say, and something that I'll enjoy.
Right.
And be proud of,
Has it changed who approaches you for commercial work? Because I remember something you told me a long time ago, and I have shared with so many people this piece of advice because I think it's fantastic. You said, let your personal work kind of dictate the direction you want to go in your commercial work. That's where your passion's going to lie. That's where your interest, that's where your curiosity is going to lie. So shoot the kind of personal work that you want to shoot professionally, and let people find you that way. Is that still the case? Do you still find that that's true?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because I'm one thing that's changed a little bit is my personal work used to be shooting strategic images that would get commercial clients. So, my personal work was kind of, it looked like an ad, but it was just something I did for myself. Whereas Uniform, I mean, I suppose you could say Uniform could be an ad, but that certainly was not the goal with it. The goal was just, it was completely different.
Yeah.
So I don't create as much of that type of commercial personal work as I used to, but certainly anything I create, I still use that mindset. And, the projects that I'm getting hired to shoot commercially are all coming from, like my family picture that I do every year, which is, it's not a traditional family picture. It's quite odd or unexpected. And, but yeah, I mean, never have I in the last couple of years gotten a job where someone showed me a commercial shoot that I did and said it's always like a personal project that I did myself, now Uniform has started to seep into that a little bit, but usually it's like the family picture or even like the iPhone portrait series that I did, or
right.
a few other, one-offs or conceptual landscapes and things like that. So yeah, it's always that stuff where you're exploring and creating for yourself that people are really drawn to. And no matter how creative you try to be or whatever, an ad is always going to be an ad. It's selling a product or a service. And when you add strategy into something, it doesn't mean it can't still be great imagery, but it's not going to, people know it's not art in its
right.
purest form. So I think, when you're creating something just because, people can tell and they're drawn to that. And because of that, like the projects that I've done these last few years have all been really fun, like totally bizarre. And I feel like something that I constantly say, and the creative director and art director constantly say on set is like, I can't believe we get to do this,
right.
Because we're usually putting wigs on people or having people dress up, or people are, acting strange or getting hurt or whatever. It's like, that's the kind of stuff I love. I love showing what happens when you don't use the product we're trying to sell. I love showing the injury that happens because you didn't have that safety helmet or whatever, as opposed to showing how happy your life can be if you wear the safety.
How perfect everything is. Yeah.
I don't get hired for everything, obviously, but or even considered. But when someone wants that very specific kind of slightly odd thing, like, I find that I'm one of the first people that they think of, which is pretty cool. So
yeah. Is there pressure on the family pictures as the audience for those sort of gets bigger and as more comes on the back of them? Do you ever feel pressure about it, or do you still just approach them as, let's do something fun and see where it lands?
Yeah, I feel pressure. I mean,
do you really?
There's been years where I'm like, let's not do this.
Really?
I mean, sometimes it just, it feels hard. I mean, it's a mix of things though. Sometimes it's just simply time. Like already we're starting to be like, ooh, we should probably be doing this right now. And
we already need to be thinking about this.
We don't even have a concept. Sometimes I overthink the concept and I'm like, I can't decide. And there's and then sometimes there's been a couple that I felt like went over incredibly well. And especially the next year, then it's like, well, how am I going to top that? And it's like, I think you just have to get over all that and not be like, hey, I'm trying to one up next year. It's just like, what do you want to do, and have fun with it. That's like you said, but I think it's easier said than done, because I don't always approach it that way.
If you didn't get so much commercial work on the back of it, do you think it would be easier, or would you still tend to overthink it because you're sort of, benching it against yourself from the previous year? Yeah,
it's funny. It's for some reason I still discount that series from a commercial. I still, even though I'm talking about it, if it makes sense, I haven't even in some part of my brain drawn the conclusion of how much work I actually get from those, which is probably a good thing. Maybe I would overthink it and get nervous if I did, but
okay, moving on. Let's move on.
But I think because it's in my head, it's just my family picture. There's still a part of me that's like, it's a family picture, but yeah, oddly it leads to most of our commercial work. So
are the kids still as into it? Or is their interest waning as they get older?
I don't know specifically about that image, about that series, but what's been really cool is just, especially this year, even for Halloween, they've both become like really excited about dressing up. Like
really?
They've always done it, the family picture, and gone along with it. But, anytime I've ever encouraged like our daughter to wear one of the many wigs that we have or whatever, she wants nothing to do with it. And the other day, she had a friend over and they came running out into the studio and they were both wearing wigs and they were just laughing like crazy.
Nice.
And they were taking pictures of themselves and stuff, and they just tried on wigs for like an hour. And so as someone who appreciates dressing up and dressing other people up, like it kind of warmed my heart to see my kids like
there's that
part.
Aw, I did that.
Yeah. I messed them up.
What'd you guys do for Halloween this year?
I didn't dress up for Halloween this year, I have to admit. I just came off of a couple shows for Uniform and a couple big campaigns, and I dressed up a little bit on set a couple times, and I felt like that
would do it.
Scratch that itch. And I just was like, I was happy to just help the kids dress this year.
With this phase of Uniform kind of winding down, what's got you excited in terms of personal work?
I'm excited about the possibility of kind of jumping into a new series, but I'm also kind of in this weird transitional phase of, it takes me a while to kind of come down from all the excitement and busyness it's a little slow right now, and which is great. I'm just trying to learn to embrace that a little more.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to jump into this new project, but I'm always hesitant to do it until I know, like, I've got at least a few weeks to kind of jump in here. Cause it's always hard if you start and then 4 or 5 days later you get your rhythm and then you're out of it again. And, it can feel a little confusing somehow. So I'm hopeful of maybe next year or sooner kind of jumping into there and starting to kind of figure some things out and explore that world a little bit. But I've got a bunch of other stuff that's up in the air. So it feels like the rest of the year right now could go in a couple different directions. And I'm just kind of waiting to see how it's going to shake out.
Will this next project be larger than, smaller than? Can you quantify it relative to Uniform?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I could see it going both ways. I could see it being small. I would actually be surprised if it was bigger in terms of number of images, but in terms of production, I think it's going to be a lot bigger. It's just totally different.
Yeah.
And it's even, I started out, I've been working on it for a year now, but the last few months I did a few shoots and put some stuff together and was feeling pretty excited about it. And then thankfully realized like it wasn't right. And so I kind of have to not start over, but I have to go back and some of those images won't be usable, which that's been a new thing too, because I've always, especially even with Uniform, my mindset has been, I'm not going to create until I know this is going to work because it's so expensive and I don't have money to I can't afford a bad shoot kind of thing. But It's interesting because, there's any number of other mediums like writing, you write a book and you're going to cut out like half the words in the final,
Right.
It's just a necessary part of the process. And, painters, I don't know for sure, but I mean, I'm pretty certain that they don't show or use everything, or sometimes they paint over an old painting and just reuse the canvas. And it's like, I don't find, at least that I have done that at all with photography. And so I'm trying to embrace that actually and just create work and make mistakes and be okay with that and not, beat myself up if an image doesn't work, but just learn from it and move forward. And one thing I think, because I still have books on my head, in my brain from Uniform, is I have this idea that I just wrote down last week of, I could see, depending on where this project goes, I like the idea of making a book with this series and showing all of the stuff that didn't work and making it more about, I'm making it like equal parts process and final imagery, because for me, my process is becoming so much more important than it ever has. And I've been writing a lot about my process and kind of what I've been learning from it. And so I thought that, I don't know, I'm intrigued by that. And so much of my work is always, so much of me, I should say, is always about presentation and trying to appear, grand and not showing any of the little cracks. And I thought that could actually be a really cool thing to just show the whole process, good and bad, and then show where it ended up and why it ended up there.
Speaking for myself, I would love to see it. I mean, as someone who, like, one of my favorite photo books, and it might even be my favorite photo book, is Magnum Contact Sheets. For that exact reason, we get to see, as my friend John puts it, garbage leading up to it and garbage leading away from it. But then there's that one shot where everything just lined up. Everything became, what the photographer wanted. Or in some cases, you see the photographer's pick and you go, well, yeah, I don't like number 4. I like number 6, or I like number 8 better. But you get to see that process of making. And I think, to your point, there's so much pressure on the final image that it would be fascinating to see how you got there, even, warts and all, what didn't work, and your thoughts around why it didn't work. Instead of just showing it, tell us why it didn't work. What didn't work about it for you? Because we as an audience may go, well, I don't see what's wrong with that. But then in your sort of context around it, go, oh, okay, I see what's going on here.
Yeah. I think sometimes the hesitation for me, or at least in the past, has been like, with Uniform specifically, it's very much about the statement that or the feeling that you get from the final imagery. And so I felt like in that, not that I considered this approach for that series, but if I were to look back and think about a more behind the scenes approach for Uniform, I feel like it would be too much of a distraction from the impact of the images. But for some reason with this new series, process feels, at least right now, so important and so much. I mean, I could almost see the series being about process in the end, the way it's going. But, I feel like it feels like a genuine place to share that story. Because sometimes I feel like we use behind the scenes as like a crutch to, I mean, if like the behind the scenes is more interesting than the final image, it's like, what does that say about the work? And maybe that's an answer I need to work out for myself. Maybe there's nothing wrong with that, but that's always something that kind of floats around in my head. But I know what you mean. I saw, it might even be the same series we're talking about, but there was a show in a gallery in LA, and I'm blanking on all of the important pieces here, but that famous photograph of Jim Morrison, though, with his shirt off and his arms out.
Oh, and his arms out with the necklace and all that?
Yeah, I wish I can remember the photographer's name. But they had the print in the gallery, and then they had the contact sheet. And it was fascinating. That image was such an outlier from the entire roll of film. And again, like, it changed my feelings on the image. And I still don't know like how I feel about that, but just from a viewer standpoint, it was fascinating.
Right.
It was just, you see that image on its own, and it's so powerful, and it's so intimate and just direct. And then you see the contact sheet, and it's like, it's almost an accident, like they were just goofing around and smiling, and then that happened, and it changes your perspective on the whole thing. It's not for me to say that it makes it worse or better or anything like that, but its context is fascinating. And that's definitely something that I'm learning through all this, because I used to fight or avoid context as much as possible, but I'm definitely becoming more open to it.
When did it start to change for you? Was that kind of a big turning point, that Morrison picture, or did you feel it start changing as you kind of started moving through uniform, or what's been the progression of it?
I mean, I think fine art and uniform specifically has been the progression of it. Just, it's hard, especially in fine art, if you're creating something that is deeply personal, it feels very vulnerable to share that. And I think when you're being vulnerable, you're showing the world that you're not perfect, and that, you're just like everyone else. And for whatever reason, that's really, really hard for me. I want everyone to think that I've got it all together, and that, I'm doing this great work, but really I'm just kind of drawing in the sand until something looks interesting to me, like, it's just like,
but there's what's wrong with that? Because it's in the recognition of the interestingness, right? Isn't there art there? Isn't there value in being able to recognize one sand drawing from another?
I think you're totally right. I think for me, it all boils down to like kind of who you are and where you were raised and how you were raised. And I think like I have this deep-seated kind of sense of don't admit weakness, don't admit weakness. We don't talk about difficult things. Everything's fine, So I think that's just a part of me that I'm constantly fighting.
Right.
And I think that's exactly where all of this talk about context comes from. But to go back to the original question, I think, uniform played a big part of it, because I wanted to just show people the work and have everyone say, oh, this is fantastic work. But what I slowly started to realize was that this work can actually make a greater impact if you share genuinely where it came from. It's easy for me to say it's great work, look at it. But like, I started experiencing myself, like maybe even from that context sheet we just talked about, time and time again, where sometimes work that I wasn't even interested in all of a sudden became quite interesting to me simply by gaining some context.
Right. And there's almost an expectation of it in the art world. Maybe it's because there are connections, that this person is important because they were inspired by that person, or this work is important because it came after this work. And there are so many connections that it's almost like it feels harder in that world for things to stand alone without sort of paying homage to what came before them, or acknowledging what influenced or inspired them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're totally right. I think it's completely different, from any other form of photography or art or creating in that sense, is because, if you're taking landscapes or whatever, I don't want to talk about things that I'm not familiar with, but for example, if I took a picture of a sunset or whatever, like it's just like, well, it was beautiful and I want to take a picture of it. If I'm shooting a campaign, it's like people don't really want to, no one's ever going to ask like, what does that mean or where does it come from? It's like, well, there's an understanding. It's like we thought this picture would make you buy an iPhone,
right. Yeah. Did it move product or did it not, kind of thing?
Yeah. So if you're talking about fine art, and especially today, maybe, I don't know, maybe in the past there was I'm just wondering out loud here, but maybe in the past there was a space in fine art where you could just make something beautiful and that was enough. But I think today, beautiful imagery is just pointless and, it's everywhere. So we're pretty numb to that. So I feel like if something is going to connect with someone, there needs to be some context and there needs to be, something shared in a genuine way that enhances or explains, why we should care about this work,
So it's fascinating to me that you want to stay in this world that demands something of you that you are reluctant at best and uncomfortable maybe at worst, although worst isn't probably not the right word, but that's not really your wheelhouse, is opening up and giving that sort of context. But there is something about this world that makes you want to stay.
Yeah. I mean, I think, man, this is making me think. I mean, it's hard and it's painful and it's difficult, but you're right. For some reason, I want to do it. I mean, I think it's important. And
the work is important, or you going through making the work is important, or both?
Oh, I think both. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I think making the work is how I go through it, essentially. It was interesting. I mean, I saw this thing on, some Fox News person put something on Twitter that blew up or whatever this past week. She said, I decided to go to Halloween as the thing that scares, or the person that scares me the most, AOC. And everyone, people who obviously agree with that person thought it was hilarious, and then everyone else, had other things to say. But what I've been thinking about these last few days is just that mindset of, she's basically equating something that scares her as it's bad, right? And I don't understand or agree with that viewpoint. I mean, I'm trying to think of what I guess maybe she should have said if she really meant what she's trying to say. But, if that's how people think, like, oh, that scares me, so I'm not going to do it. I just think that's dangerous territory, because then there's no growth,
Right.
I, as a parent, we see that with our kids all the time. There's all kinds of stuff that scares them. And as a parent, you have to kind of decide, like, well, maybe this is not time to introduce this.
Right.
Or maybe, this is a time where we embrace that fear and we learn coming out the other side, that was scary, but I actually enjoyed it, or I appreciate what I have learned because of that experience. And, it makes me a better person.
Or how is it scary? Is it scary dangerous, or is it just scary uncomfortable?
Yeah. So, I don't know. It's a great question. I don't know. I'd have to probably spend more time with that, but I thankfully so far have, for the most part, gone towards the fear and worked through it. I think there must be some sort of, there is some great gratification and growth that comes from it. Just simply maybe going through it and realizing that it allows you to continue to move towards things that are scary, knowing the benefit that will come, even though you don't necessarily see or feel it at the time. But
right. But I mean, you were scared about uniform. We talked about that. I remember that. You had no idea where this was going to land, but you felt compelled to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this was a completely different world for you, going from commercial and personal work to this whole sort of fine art realm, and then the book, doing all the research on what does this mean? Am I able to do this? What choices do I have to make? Is this the best presentation for my work? I mean, that's all uncomfortable stuff, and it sounds like you've come out the other side of it inspired to do more. Like it's whet your appetite, right? So what's next, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, hearing you say that, I suppose that's something that thankfully is a part of me. Is I sometimes, maybe through ignorance, I don't think through
there's no grand plan here.
Yeah. But I definitely get, I have a lot of ideas, and it's just a matter of which ones feel most compelling or most exciting to follow through with, but yeah, I mean, beyond that too, there's a lot of people and things experiences along the way that definitely encourage you. And, there was a point where I did walk away from uniform, a couple points where I walked away from it, not necessarily saying it's done, but just kind of not really thinking about it either. And, writing the intro for uniform was probably the hardest thing I ever had to do. I went through 4 or 5 different versions and ideas, and I just talked about it endlessly. And eventually at one point, Nichelle just was like, "What do you want to say?"
Right.
And
could you answer that at that point?
Well, not before she said that. And after she said that, I think it was just, I don't know what it was, but something clicked at that point. And I just sat down. I think what it was is I just finally was like, I've just got to let my guard down, and I've got to stop thinking so hard about this. And so I sat down, not the first time I'd done this, but I sat down and just started writing. And I just wrote a bunch of just free thought, writing anything
Not
down.
necessarily the intro per se, but just writing.
Yeah, I'm just going to write notes and just get everything out, out of my brain. And then maybe Nichelle can make sense of it or something, because she's my editor and does a really good job. And that's usually how it works. And so I just wrote a bunch of stuff, and I thought, oh, this is terrible. And it makes me feel weak and vulnerable because it's probably too honest. And I was just super anxious about it. And I somehow I got through it, and I sent it to her, and I was like, here, tell me if there's anything you can work with here or whatever. And she said, this is the most interesting thing you've ever written about this.
Wow.
Which almost wasn't really what I wanted to hear.
Wait, why wasn't it? Why would you not want to hear that?
Because I think that was what I was so scared of, was being honest.
Okay. And please, if I'm overstepping, just back me up. But where did the idea that being honest equals being weak and vulnerable, where did that come from?
Oh man, I mean, I think I sometimes I have to censor myself with this kind of stuff, but I think the honest answer is, and there's probably way more that I'm not aware of or not taking into consideration, but I grew up in an evangelical Christian church, and my dad was a pastor.
Sure.
And life was very much about being seen and watched by people in the congregation. And so nothing that we had to make sure that nothing we did reflected poorly on my dad. And so I was constantly, hearing so-and-so from the church called and said she saw you skating today and that you were behaving or something, like, well done or whatever,
wow. So you always felt like you were under a microscope.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so if we did something, it wasn't just like, hey, that wasn't maybe the best choice. It was always, there was this guilt of you really made your dad look bad.
Mm-hmm. There was a greater responsibility than just what did John look like. There was this sort of whole familial responsibility. Wow.
And so I think that's
a lot of weight.
I don't know if I've ever actually verbalized that way, but that feels very familiar to me. And I think that, there was just a lot of that kind of stuff.
So are you still in that spotlight on some level, or does that still creep into how you think that other people perceive you or react to you?
I mean, sure. I mean, I think this whole conversation has been clouded by some of that. And, and I think that's where the whole thing comes from, of not wanting to, show weakness. And I think part of that too is also just, personality, my personality. I got to take responsibility for that. But I think it's also, I see themes in my family, where the family I come from, where it's like, we don't talk about difficult things. We don't acknowledge difficult things. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here.
Move along.
Everyone move along, kind of thing. And so there's been a lot of really big moments throughout my family history where that's been the path chosen. And so I think that's what you get when you live into something like that. And so hopefully I can try to make changes as best I can, into it in a different direction. But for me, that is the clearest understanding or idea of where some of this comes from, is just, I still equate, vulnerability as weakness, in myself and in others. And so we've talked a bunch over the years, and we've only met once in person, but
you have always struck me as a person of huge integrity and just one of these sort of genuinely, and nice is going to come out the wrong way, but yeah, you're just this good, you strike me anyway as this good person.
Well, I appreciate that.
And
that's my radio personality coming through.
Is it really? It's not really the real you.
Well, I mean, obviously, like everyone's got, different layers, and, I mean, I hope, I believe that, that this is me coming through. My wife is in the room. She can speak up if she disagrees with anything, but I mean, we're obviously all so much more complex, and we have our moments when we're unguarded and tired and frustrated, and life comes at you fast. So, I mean, yeah, there's,
So were you afraid of, maybe even afraid is the wrong word, but was there a cautious optimism about how Uniform would be received with the introduction intact versus how it was received without any additional context? Was there a difference in how you thought it might be interpreted?
Yeah, I was nervous about the way that it went out, because part of me thought that people wouldn't take me as seriously as I wanted to be taken, or I thought, people would view me as weak, or whatever. But
how can you expect people to take you seriously with the family photos that you put out every year?
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I got a lot to figure out there. But yeah, I mean, it's funny though, because I think back on one of the things that I almost went to press with, and I would have felt ashamed of that. It was so just self-indulgent and
really, yeah.
So thankfully I didn't go through with that one. But again, like, you make choices, and sometimes you go to press before you realize that you made the wrong choice. Thankfully, that wasn't the case here. Sometimes you get a tattoo and you regret it later. So, I mean, it's just, but yeah, there was definitely a difference. I thought the funny thing though, going back to that, is the one that I almost went to press with that I'm glad I didn't. I felt so confident about that one. I thought it was so clever and smart, and people were going to just be tripping over themselves, which again, just, I guess, shows you like how much your own perspective can cloud reality.
Right. Who caught it? Did you catch it, or did Nichelle catch it and say, no, this is not what we're going to do here?
No, I think it was, I don't know. I think there must have been a part of me that still didn't 100% feel great about it. I still kept thinking like, is this the best choice? Even though I think for the most part, I just wanted to be done. And so I was also just excited to be done. But there must have been some part of me that knew deep down it maybe wasn't the right approach. And so I think that was kind of where that question from Nichelle came from, is we'd made this decision, I'd written it, we sent it out to press, and I just kept still saying like, I don't know, like what, I just kept thinking out loud about it. And I think she just got frustrated and was like, I essentially probably felt like I was asking her what to say. And she was like, what do you want to say?
Right.
And that finally snapped me into a place where I was able to do that. So
has that had an effect on this next body of work that you're producing right now? Is what's coming out of Uniform, is that going deeper into the next body of work, or are they unrelated?
Well, I think they're completely related in the sense that they're both, my children, so to speak. So I think like everything that I've learned from Uniform is definitely going into this new series. And, my process has definitely evolved and grown from Uniform. And so I'm giving myself a lot of grace and a lot of patience in this new series. And I think I'm giving myself a lot of room to make mistakes and just simply create things with the full understanding that they may never see the light of day. But in terms of visuals, I mean, they're quite different. And I'm allowing process to even change what the series is about. The series started out very specifically about this idea of how a place affects a person. So with Uniform, it was very much about being seen and kind of the difference between who you are and how you want to be seen versus how other people judge you or view you or tell you who you are, kind of thing, which goes back to kind of what we talked about growing up in the church, like
sure,
who you are versus who everyone else tells you need to be and how you need to act, kind of thing. So that was Uniform, was the difference between these real people who had this real experience and then this idea of this little green toy soldier that people just play with and play war with no connection to like what it actually represents.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, that was very much about a person. And this next series began, and I guess I'm putting it out here now, but it began as how a place affects a person, which was very much the place I grew up, which is a small rural town in California. I never felt like, I always felt like a fish out of water there. It wasn't a place I wanted to be. I felt at odds with the place and the people there. But it definitely made a big impact on me. And I found over the last few years, just from looking back and from self-reflection, I found it odd that a lot of the work that I create has been like taking me back to the very place that I wanted to flee from when I was a kid.
Wow.
Which kind of goes back again, I guess, to this idea of like, why do I want to do things that are so difficult?
Right.
But I don't know. And that's something that I will probably be exploring for quite a while. But I found myself drawn to these desolate rural California landscapes, and I started kind of writing this idea around how that affected me and exploring those emotions. And now from the work that I've done so far, it's that, but it's grown into like just the very act of creating. It's almost becoming about process just as much as that original idea. And so I think now one of the things I've learned from Uniform is just allowing myself to be open to what happens and responding to that. Whereas a number of years ago, if we had this conversation, I would have said right now, this is what the new series is about. I've made, like I said, I've made a lot of claims, and and then when I change my mind, I feel embarrassed or like, oh, I shouldn't have said that or whatever. But I'm finding that it's the journey that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
It's not where you think you're going. 'Cause half the time you probably won't even end up where you think you're going anyway. So
right.
I'm totally leaving it open at this point, but, I don't know. It could end up, if I had to guess right now, it could end up being a series about self-exploration and creation,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the work is the process of making it. Yeah. Dan Winters said in a conversation that the photographs, they're the evidence of the process. They're the evidence of the passion that you're putting into the work. And I think sometimes and I think you touched on this earlier in terms of the commercial work, that the final image or the final, video, if you're shooting commercials, that's the end all be all. And the whole journey to get there is almost irrelevant, because it really is just, does that final picture move product, or does it connect, A to B? And it sounds like with your personal work, you're becoming more comfortable with letting us see you at work, letting us see you work through these problems, letting us see you work over obstacles. And that in and of itself is the work.
Yeah, I think so. I'm definitely, if you told me that even a year ago, I would have probably fought you on that. But I think that is pretty accurate, I think, because so much goes into it. And I'm finding, even for myself, the stuff that I'm learning or the stuff that's changing who I am isn't necessarily like reflected visually in the final image. So how do you just leave that stuff on the cutting room floor when that's the stuff that actually changed you,
Right. Yeah. And where does it fit? Like to your point earlier, you don't want to just sort of tack it on. You don't want to make it feel like it's gratuitous. So how does the getting there fit in the here's where I got to?
Right.
Yeah. Well, let me know when you figure that out.
No, man, I love this. You always have such your ability to kind of like get between the lines and the cracks and dig deeper. I always appreciate that, because
Thank you.
This is stuff that I've thought about, but never necessarily in the way that you're kind of bringing it up. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Your personal work has always been some of my favorite work, period, full stop.
Oh, thanks.
There are some of your pictures that I can't get out of my head for whatever reason. The guy in the it's not a wetsuit, but with the big metal helmet on out in the desert with the puddle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I love that image. And I don't know why. I think maybe it's you. You're that fish out of water. You're that guy who's trying to get someplace, but you feel outside of it. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, this is something that I've kind of like learned a little bit recently about myself. Is I think going back to kind of part of the story that I shared was growing up in that environment where you're constantly kind of being told who you are or who you need to be, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I felt like I had to constantly shock people to get their attention or to get them to see me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so it wasn't always like the best attention, but I found if I could do things that were weird or unusual or surprise people for a minute, it would be like, what is, maybe the response would be like, what is wrong with you or whatever. Right. But like, it kind of broke them out of the trance broke them out of that like shell that I perceived where everything has to be the same way kind of thing. And so,
John, that's an interesting word that you just used, trance.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, that resonates with me even today, especially like in our climate today, where we just, going back to that thing we talked about where the woman dressed up as AOC and
right.
It's like, well, why is being afraid of someone or an idea, why is that a bad thing? That might actually be a really good thing.
Yeah. Do you remember when this started for you? When you felt like you had to kind of break out of that perception of who you were?
Well, this is not something that I ever formulated or understood in the moment. I mean, this is stuff that only in the last couple of years have I begun to like make sense of. Mm-hmm.
So you're still just kind of starting to unpack it all.
Yeah. But I mean, it all resonates and it feels familiar as I look back and I recognize the behavior, and it's like, I can begin to understand where that behavior came from now. But definitely in my teenage years or even younger, I definitely, I don't know, I wasn't aware of it. Now, I have to also think like, sometimes there is just a person in who they are. And it's like some people are probably just naturally inclined to be troublemakers or whatever. Like, right. I don't know if it's fair to say like everything I did was, because of this situation or whatever. Like to some extent you have a personality and then there's outlying factors that come into play. But I mean, certainly from a very young age, like I was always pushing buttons and always trying to like shock or surprise people or get people's attention. And maybe I just am a person who needs attention in a certain way. I mean, so I need to take responsibility in a lot of that as well. Mm-hmm. But I guess moving forward, like I've realized that a lot of like Diver in the Desert, that image that you referenced.
Yeah.
That was an image I created a little while ago before I had any sort of understanding or information about who I am. And so that was just like this moment where I just happened to create something that worked, that I think really was true and genuine, but I don't want to say it was an accident because I stand by it, but it was like, it wasn't an informed moment of creation. It was something that just happened, but it was meant to be, if that makes sense. And so I think that and work that I think is truly most reflective of who I am is work that makes people stop and wonder, like, what is going on here?
Right.
And that goes back to, the story I just told of like trying to get people's attention in that way. Like that's the way I've always communicated to some extent. And that's the way that that I find I need to create if I'm being genuine. Mm-hmm.
And is this next project kind of another or like the next sort of iteration of that, of you kind of pushing further, deeper, harder?
It definitely needs to be harder because it's something that right now doesn't feel like it's coming completely natural to me. And so, I mentioned I created 3 images and for this new series, and I made prints and I took them down to LA with me a month or so ago when I was down there, and I met with my rep Marin, who I've also found. I don't think that if you're creating something, I don't think you should share it with other people or ask for input, especially during the creation process. Maybe when you're done to a few key people, but I think it's really important to not get that outside feedback because it doesn't matter what someone else thinks. It matters what you think. It's
sure.
your work,
especially if you're still trying to work through it.
Totally, because someone could say like, "Oh, I think it looks better this way" or whatever, and all of a sudden you start catering to what you think people want, and you've lost sight of like what it needs to be. And so, but that being said, there are maybe a couple people in my life who know me really well and who not only know me but who I respect from a creative standpoint as well. And Marin is one of those people. And so we had lunch and we were talking, and then I got out the prints and I shared them with her, and she really liked one of them, and the other two she just really did not like at all. And
really,
it was crushing, but also it was weird. It was like, it really bothered me because something I've already mentioned before is I just wanted them to be done. Like they were finished images and I put so much into them and I just wanted them to be done. But at the same time, I completely agreed with her and knew that she was right. And that was also really frustrating because like I didn't want that to be the case, which feels exactly like writing the intro for Uniform. But
I don't want this to be the best explanation. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, it's hard. And sometimes you don't want to do the hard work, you know?
Right.
And she said something that kind of really got me thinking more about what we just talked about, which was, she said, your best work always makes me wonder what in the world is happening here. And she said, these are just beautiful images. And I could talk a little more about some of them. One of them, I see how that is perceived, but I still stand by it. The other image, without a doubt, it's just a beautiful image. It's a really cool image. Like from a beauty standpoint, it's maybe the most beautiful image I've ever made, but it doesn't move me at all. And clearly it doesn't move the audience either. And I lost sight, for a minute of who I am and what I'm actually trying to do. And I just started creating pretty pictures. And so it's always tough, especially when you start on something, to know how far back do I need to go?
Right.
How far back do I need to reset? How do I remove all these ideas or thoughts that I've already associated with this project and start from the right place? So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I think to some extent what I need to do, but I don't necessarily know how I'm going to do it, if that makes any sense.
Are you able to let go of maybe disappointment's the wrong word, but I think you know where I'm at. The disappointment of those two images not hitting the mark or letting yourself off the hook for even producing them in the first place when you kind of knew, it sounds like you kind of knew that wasn't the right direction anyway?
I mean, I think there's a certain level of disappointment that I will carry with me until the series is complete and I can be like, this is how it was, this is better, and this is how it should have been. But until I have something else to show, there is always, I don't know, there is a disappointment when you put time into something that doesn't yield tangible results. Now it's yielded, I think, I know in my head, it's yielded incredibly valuable results just from knowledge and experience, but it's hard sometimes to align that knowledge with a feeling of achievement.
Right. You've got the knowledge, but nothing to show for it.
Basically.
Yeah.
So I think, it's hard, but I think it just kind of goes back to like, you just collect these experiences of doing things that are difficult or scary and seeing how you come out on the other side, and you just begin to trust that process. And that's kind of where I'm at with this, is like, I know it's going to be better because of this, but it is still a little frustrating because there's a part of me that like, sometimes I'll go on a walk and I see a beautiful flower and it's like, why do we feel compelled to cut that flower and take it home?
Right.
Why can't you just simply see the flower and appreciate it and know like, oh, how cool that I had the opportunity to see that beautiful thing.
Right.
And so there is that part of me that always wants to collect and keep and archive, all these experiences. And that's the part that I think I have to let go of here.
Well, it sounds like you're on the right path.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. It's always good to have these conversations and it gives you a chance to like reflect back and see like where you're at a certain point. Cause I think sometimes if you don't talk about it or at least write about it too, along that journey, like it is easy to forget the way that you went to get wherever you end up going. And so,
right. Do you find yourself writing more on the back of what came out of the introduction for Uniform? Do you find that you're writing not necessarily with any sort of purpose, but just expressing in that medium?
Yeah, I'm taking a lot of notes. Like I write a lot of little quick thoughts down and stuff. And I started the year off writing a creative journal and I got a few months into it and then life picked up and I just don't have the time I seem to have at the beginning of the year. But I do try to collect all of my ideas and thoughts so that at least at some point when I am able to sit down and write, I'm able to kind of make sense of them and maybe in that point share a little deeper. But especially just even like this idea of like doing a book about process along with the final outcome, that's kind of like a nice like reminder or an encouragement for me to make sure that I am recording the process a little more in depth.
Man, I hope you do it. If for nothing else, just to have that collection of experiences documented for you, even if you decide never to release it, just to have those things to reflect on and to think about and to let them sort of seep in and inform maybe not this project, but maybe what comes next.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Hopefully it will happen. I don't see why I wouldn't, but who knows? We'll see. But no, I appreciate the encouragement.
Did the process of making this book, has that kind of solidified that books are at least part of your personal workflow moving forward?
I mean, it's really cool to have a book, as you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something that I still struggle to put words to. There's just something about having this physical thing. And maybe like for people like us, maybe there's like this, I don't know if you resonate with this, but like I have this like collector mentality.
Yep.
I've always collected things, and there's this like odd satisfaction with having like seeing things in like groups or like
100%. Yeah.
Continuation of patterns and stuff. And so I just, from seeing like a whole section of one book on my bookshelf to like being able to hand one to somebody, there's just something really gratifying about that. And also I think to some extent it like allows me to kind of feel a sense of like accomplishment or like completion with the series too, even though I'm still making prints and there still could be, shows and things like that will continue on. There's a part of me that feels like I'm able to move on. I'm able to move on despite the fact that the series lives on.
Right.
If without a book, it might have been a harder transition, I feel like. But that being said, I mean, I think the book is really cool and I'm really happy with it. And I feel just a sense of pride about it. So,
yeah. And they're a marathon. I mean, books are a marathon. They're just, granted, I didn't do a fine art book, but there is something, they built this new library at the end of our street, and it's this beautiful $80 million library, community center kind of thing. And it's a lovely building, but my book is in that library, and we went in and somebody had checked it out.
That's
and
so cool.
Not only that, they renewed it, John. So they didn't bring it back. And I thought, that is awesome. The coolest thing ever. That is just, I can't even that somebody looked at this thing and went, yeah, I want to take this home and check it out. And then decided to keep it for another, whatever it is, week or two. And it totally makes me want to do another one. I have no idea what I would do. I have zero idea what I would do, but I really enjoyed the process. And to your point, having that physical thing that, if somebody comes over and it happens to go, the conversation happens to go in that direction, and you can pull it down off the shelf and go, yeah, here it is. Yeah. There's something about that's just, I wasn't prepared for.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a bookstore here in Seattle called Peter Miller Books. And I think it started off as a bookstore on just architectural books, and it's kind of expanded a little bit more into design and things like that. But it's just like really beautiful space. And I had never met the owner before, but you hear all kinds of stories about him. He's just like a local treasure. I was walking, I guess in the summer downtown, and I had just received a copy of the book from the press just for color check and stuff. So it hadn't come out yet, but I had an early copy, and it was in my backpack, and I was walking by the store, and I was like, I should go in there. And I was like, no. But I convinced myself to go in. So I went in and I asked if the owner was there, and he was. And I said, I have a new book. I just got a copy. Would you be willing to take a look at it for me? And he spoke so philosophically and deeply about books. I almost don't even really know what he was talking about. But one thing that he did was he took the book out of my hands, and he just stopped and he looked at me right in the eyes, and he said, "You created a book." He said, "That is an amazing thing." He said, you should really cherish that." And he kept repeating things similar to that. Mm-hmm. And what I left with was just this like reverence for creating something tangible that I think I fully appreciated until I met with him, because it was so clear that this is like, books are like spiritual things to him, and I think to many people. And it's like, sometimes I just get in this, we get into this routine of just working and doing same things over and over again. And I don't know, I was really glad that I had that experience at the very beginning where for a moment I was able to like stop and appreciate from an outside perspective, like, wow, I made a book. And this guy clearly has spent his life dedicated to books. And I'm this guy that just came in and was like, hey, I'm going to make a book. And so I have a long way to go, but it was a great start to the journey of like really appreciating, understanding like this tangible thing that can pass from hand to hand. And like you said, just that excitement of like knowing that one person wanted that book.
And it sounds like you've been able to carry that sort of reverence, to use the term that you used, through this whole process into, what may be the next one. And what did I do for this one? Now I want to do something else. I want to do something different. I want to do something more. I want to let this unfold the way it needs to. And that sounds like, what a great place to be, man.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. It's been fun to share the journey with you along the way. And I think I learned, part of the process is even these conversations, like just talking out loud about it. And you realize like, oh man, I don't think I've ever thought about it that way before.
If you'd like to see some of John's work, including Uniform, head over to his website at johnkeatley.com. That's JohnKeatley.com. You can also find him on Instagram and Twitter at John Keatley. Subscribe to Process Driven in your favorite podcast app, or if you'd like to get every episode of Process Driven along with my other shows In Between and Iterations, subscribe to Jeffrey Saddoris Everything. If you're enjoying the show, you can help others find it by leaving a review or a rating on iTunes or by sharing it on social media. Connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at Jeffrey Saddoris, that's JeffreySaddoris, or on my website at jeffreysaddoris.com. You can also email me at talkback@jeffreysaddoris.com. I'd love to hear what you're up to. Thanks very much for listening. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here, and I'll talk to you on the next one.